The blood on her hands had not yet dried when Lucia Castellano stumbled through the mesa country of southern New Mexico territory, knowing that every minute she remained alive was borrowed time. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness of that September night in 1878, the Valdez brothers would be mounting their horses, and when they found her, there would be no mercy for the woman who had witnessed their crime. She had not meant to see Don Rodrigo's murder, had not meant to be in the hacienda's courtyard when the knife flashed in the moonlight, but fate cared nothing for intentions. And now, she ran with only the clothes on her back and terror as her companion. The desert stretched endlessly before her as dawn broke across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson that reminded her too much of what she had seen. Lucia's throat burned with thirst, her feet bleeding through the thin soles of her shoes, but she pushed forward because stopping meant dying. She had left everything behind in Las Cruces, the small house her parents had built before fever took them both, the garden where her mother's roses still bloomed, the grave markers she tended every Sunday after Mass. All of it was gone now, as unreachable as the stars, because the Valdez brothers owned that town through fear and violence, and she had made herself their enemy simply by existing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. 3 days she walked, drinking from muddy cattle tanks and eating prickly pear fruit that left her fingers bleeding from the tiny spines. The mountains rose blue and distant to the north, and she followed them like a compass, because the Valdez influence weakened the farther from Las Cruces she traveled. On the 4th morning, half dead from exposure and exhaustion, she crested a rise and saw the valley below, green with cottonwoods following a creek's path, and beyond it, a ranch house with smoke rising from its chimney. Lucia had never begged for anything in her 22 years, had worked as a seamstress and taken in laundry to keep her independence after her parents died. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She made her way down the rocky slope, stumbling more than walking now, her vision blurring at the edges. The ranch house grew larger, became real instead of a mirage, and she could see horses in a corral, cattle dotting the grassland beyond. Her legs gave out 50 yards from the front porch, and she fell hard onto the packed earth, tasting dust and blood. She was not sure how long she lay there before she heard footsteps approaching, boots crunching on gravel. Strong hands lifted her carefully, and through the haze of near consciousness, she saw a man's face, whether worn and concerned, gray eyes studying her with an intensity that should have frightened her but somehow did not. "Easy now," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I have got you. You are safe here. Safe." The word seemed impossible, a concept from another lifetime, but Lucia let herself believe it as darkness claimed her completely. When she woke, she found herself in a small bedroom with whitewashed walls and clean sheets that smelled of soap and sunshine. Evening light slanted through the window, and for a confused moment she thought she was back in her parents' house, that everything had been a terrible dream. Then memory crashed back and she sat up too quickly, her head spinning. The door opened immediately, as if someone had been listening for movement. The man from the yard entered, carrying a tray with a bowl of something that steamed and smelled like heaven. He was tall, she saw now, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway and dark hair touched with gray at the temples. Maybe 30 years old, perhaps a year or two more. His face was honest, she decided, the kind that could not hide deception if it tried. "You should lie back down," he said, setting the tray on the small table beside the bed. "My sister checked you over, said you have been walking for days without proper food or water. You are lucky to be alive. Where am I?" Lucia's voice came out as a rasp, and he immediately handed her a cup of water. She drank carefully, remembering how dangerous it was to gulp when truly thirsty. My ranch, about 20 miles north of Silver City in the New Mexico Territory. I am Grant Jameson. My sister Ruth lives here too, helps me run the place since my folks passed 3 years back. I should not be here, Lucia said, though every part of her rebelled against the thought of leaving this safe, clean room. I do not want to bring trouble to your door. Grant pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his expression serious. That sounds like a story I need to hear, but first you eat. Then we talk. The soup was beef and vegetables, rich and perfectly seasoned, and Lucia had to force herself to eat slowly when her body screamed to devour it. Grant waited patiently, not pressing her, and she appreciated his restraint more than she could say. When the bowl was empty, she set it aside and met his eyes. My name is Lucia Castellano. 4 nights ago, I saw the Valdez brothers murder Don Rodrigo Martinez in Las Cruces. They saw me see them. I ran because the alternative was dying, and probably not quickly. The words came out flat, drained of emotion by exhaustion and fear. They own the sheriff, own half the businessmen in town. If I had stayed, if I had gone to the law, I would have been dead by morning. Grant's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his temple. The Valdez brothers, I have heard of them, cattle rustlers who graduated to worse things. Word is they have killed at least 6 men, probably more they have hidden better. 7 now, Lucia said quietly. Don Rodrigo was a good man. He gave work to families who needed it, never cheated anyone. But he owned land the Valdez family wanted, and he refused to sell. She looked down at her hands, seeing again the flash of the knife, the way Don Rodrigo had fallen. I should have screamed, should have done something, but I froze. By the time I could move, it was too late to help him, and the brothers were looking right at me. You survived, Grant said firmly. That is what matters. And you are right that going to the law would have been suicide if the Valdez family owns the sheriff. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. They will be looking for you. Will they track you this far? I do not know. I tried to hide my trail, walked in the creek for miles when I could, but they are not stupid, and they are very motivated to silence me. Lucia felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She had not cried once since fleeing Las Cruces, had not allowed herself the luxury, and she would not start now. I will leave in the morning. I have already taken too much of your kindness. You will stay right here, Grant said, and there was iron in his voice now, the tone of a man used to being obeyed. Tomorrow you can talk to Ruth, maybe help her with the garden or the house chores if you are feeling strong enough. We will figure out the rest as we go. You do not understand. If they come here, if they find me, they will not care that you are innocent. They will kill you and your sister both, burn this place to the ground just to make sure I am dead. Grant stood, and for the first time, Lucia noticed the gun belt hanging on his hip, the well-worn handle of the Colt revolver suggesting a man who knew how to use it. Miss Castellano, I have spent the last 8 years building this ranch from nothing. I have fought drought, fought disease, fought rustlers and Apaches, and every damn thing this territory could throw at me. The Valdez brothers do not scare me half as much as the thought of turning away someone who needs help. He moved toward the door, then paused. Get some rest. We will talk more in the morning. After he left, Lucia lay back on the pillows, her mind churning. She should leave, should slip away in the night and keep running until she reached California or Colorado or anywhere the Valdez name meant nothing. But her body refused to cooperate with her intentions, exhaustion dragging her down into sleep before she could form any coherent plan. Morning brought sunshine through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. Lucia dressed in her dirty, torn traveling clothes, grimacing at her reflection in the small mirror. Her dark hair was a tangled mess, her face scratched and sunburned, her dress beyond saving. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had barely escaped death. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found herself in a comfortable main room with a stone fireplace and furniture that was simple but well made. A woman a few years younger than Grant looked up from the stove, her smile warm and welcoming. "Oh good, you are up." "I am Ruth, Grant's little sister, though I will be 26 next month, so not so little anymore." She was pretty, with the same gray eyes as her brother and honey-colored hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Grant told me some of what happened, you poor thing. Come sit down, breakfast is ready." Lucia found herself seated at a sturdy wooden table, a plate of eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits in front of her. Grant came in from outside, his clothes dusty, and washed his hands at the basin before joining them. "Checked the perimeter this morning," he said, helping himself to coffee. "No signs of anyone passing through. We should be fine, but I will keep watch for a while just to be safe." The casual way he said it, as if protecting her was simply part of the day's work, made Lucia's throat tight. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. I could be lying about everything." Ruth reached across the table and patted her hand. "You are not lying. It is written all over you what you have been through, and we help people because that is what decent folks do. Our parents taught us that, even when it is hard, even when it costs us something." "Besides," Grant added, a hint of humor in his voice, "we could use an extra pair of hands around here. Ruth has been complaining about the garden being too much work for one person, and I am worthless with anything that involves plants not eating me." Despite everything, Lucia found herself smiling slightly. "I can work. I am good with sewing, with plants. My mother taught me before she died." "Then it is settled," Ruth said brightly. "You will stay here, help us out, and we will keep you safe. Those Valdez criminals will not find you here, and even if they do, Grant can shoot the wings off a fly at 50 paces. "Ruth exaggerates," Grant said dryly. "More like 40 paces. The days that followed took on a strange, almost dreamlike quality." Lucia worked alongside Ruth in the large garden behind the house, tending tomatoes and squash and beans. The physical labor was hard but satisfying, and she found comfort in the rhythms of planting and weeding and watering. Ruth was easy company, chattering about the ranch and the neighbors and town gossip from Silver City, where they went once a month for supplies. Grant was a quieter presence, up before dawn to check the cattle and horses, riding the fence lines to make repairs, doing the 100 tasks that kept a ranch running. But Lucia noticed how his eyes tracked to her throughout the day, checking on her, making sure she was managing. It was not intrusive, just a quiet watchfulness that made her feel protected in a way she had not experienced since her parents' deaths. At night, after dinner, they would sit on the porch as the desert cooled, and sometimes Grant would tell stories about the ranch, about the wild horse he had broken that became his favorite mount, about the time a mountain lion killed 3 calves before he finally tracked it down. His voice in the darkness was soothing, and Lucia found herself relaxing in ways she had thought impossible. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Lucia's hands grew calloused from work, her skin tanned despite the bonnet Ruth loaned her. She helped with the cooking, with the endless laundry, with mending clothes and blankets. She felt useful again, felt human again, and the nightmares that woke her gasping began to come less frequently. She also began to notice things about Grant Jameson that had nothing to do with safety or sanctuary. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, rare but genuine. The gentleness in his big hands when he handled a newborn calf or repaired a broken chair. The fairness with which he treated the 2 ranch hands who helped with the cattle. Mexican boys barely 18 who spoke more Spanish than English but worked harder than anyone Lucia had ever seen. She noticed, too, the way Grant looked at her sometimes, a hunger in his gaze that he quickly shuddered when he realized she saw. It should have frightened her, but instead, it sent a curious warmth through her chest, a feeling she had not expected to experience ever again. One evening in early October, Lucia was alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner while Ruth visited a neighbor woman who had just had a baby. Grant came in from the porch, and she was acutely aware of his presence in the small space, the way he seemed to fill it just by being there. "You have been here a month now," he said, leaning against the door frame. "How are you doing? Really doing, not just the polite answer." Lucia dried her hands on a towel, considering. "Better. The nightmares are less. During the day, sometimes I forget for whole hours what happened, forget that I am hiding." She turned to face him fully. "I owe you and Ruth everything. I would be dead without your kindness." "You do not owe us anything," Grant said, moving closer. "You have more than earned your keep with all the work you do. Ruth told me yesterday that you are the best thing that ever happened to her garden, and I believe her." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "But that is not what I wanted to talk about." "What did you want to talk about?" Lucia's heart was beating faster, though she could not have said why. "I want you to stay. Not just until the Valdez threat passes, not just as a worker. I want you to stay because I—" He stopped, took a breath. "I have spent 8 years building this ranch, and not once have I met a woman who made me think about anything beyond the next season's calves. Then you show up, half dead and terrified, and all I can think about is how to make you smile, how to take that shadow out of your eyes." His gaze locked with hers, intense and honest. "I am not good with pretty words, Lucia, but I am falling in love with you, have been since the moment you woke up in that bedroom, and the first thing you did was worry about bringing trouble to us. Tell me I am not crazy. Tell me you feel even a fraction of what I feel." The raw vulnerability in his voice undid something in Lucia's chest, some knot of fear and grief she had been carrying for so long. She crossed the space between them in 2 steps and reached up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "You are not crazy," she whispered. "I feel it too. I have been trying not to, trying to keep my distance because I am still so broken, still so afraid. But Grant, when I am with you, I feel like maybe I could be whole again. Like maybe there is a future that is not just running and hiding." He gathered her into his arms carefully, as if she might break, and she pressed her face against his chest, hearing the strong, steady beat of his heart. For a long moment, they just held each other, and it was enough, more than enough. When he finally kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Lucia felt something in her soul settle, like a bird finding a place to nest after a long migration. She had lost her homeland, lost everything familiar and safe, but here in Grant's arms, she found something she had not known she needed. They pulled apart when they heard Ruth's wagon approaching, both of them slightly breathless and smiling like fools. Ruth took one look at them when she came through the door and grinned. "Well, it is about time," she said, hanging up her shawl. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other until winter." The next weeks were a golden time, despite the shadow of threat that still hung over them. Grant taught Lucia to ride, patiently correcting her seat and showing her how to communicate with the horse. They rode out together to check the cattle, and he showed her the boundaries of his land, the places he loved, the plans he had for expanding the herd. "I want to build something that lasts," he told her one afternoon as they sat on a bluff overlooking the ranch. "Something my children and their children can inherit and be proud of." "Children," Lucia repeated softly. "You want children? Someday, yes. 3 or 4 if I am blessed." A house full of noise and laughter. He looked at her sideways. "What about you? I always thought I would have a family before everything happened. Now I just want a chance to live without fear." She leaned against his shoulder. "But yes, children sound wonderful. If the world ever feels safe enough for them." Grant kissed the top of her head. "I will make it safe. That is a promise." But the world, as it turned out, had other plans. In mid-November, one of the ranch hands, young Miguel, came galloping into the yard, his horse lathered with sweat. Grant and Lucia were mending a section of fence, and they dropped their tools immediately at the sight of his urgency. "Señor Grant," Miguel gasped, sliding from the saddle. "In town at Silver City, I heard men asking about a woman, Mexican woman, dark hair, traveling alone. They said her name was Lucia Castellano, said she was wanted for theft, offering a reward." Lucia felt the blood drain from her face. "The Valdez brothers. They are spreading lies about me, making people think I am a criminal." Grant's expression went hard as stone. "How many men?" "Two that I saw, but they had the look of hired guns. They showed a drawing to the sheriff, a picture of Señorita Lucia's face." Miguel looked apologetic. "It was a good picture, señor. Anyone who has seen her would recognize it." "We have been careful," Ruth said, joining them from the house. "Lucia has not gone into town, has not been seen by anyone but us and the hands. They cannot know she is here." "Not yet," Grant agreed. "But if they are in Silver City asking questions, it is only a matter of time before someone remembers seeing Miguel and Jose at the ranch, wonders if we might be hiding someone." He turned to Lucia, his hand finding hers. "We need to decide how to handle this." "I will leave," Lucia said immediately, though the words tore at her heart. "Tonight, before they connect me to this place, I will not let them hurt you, any of you. No." Grant's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "Running is not the answer. You run now, you will be running forever, and eventually they will catch you. We need a better solution." "What solution? I cannot go to the law, cannot prove my innocence. It is their word against mine, and they have money and power." Lucia felt the panic rising in her chest, the same choking fear that had driven her into the desert 2 months ago. Grant was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then his expression cleared, and he looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Marry me." "What, marry me?" "Right now, today. If you are my wife, you are under my protection in ways that go beyond just hospitality. Any attack on you is an attack on me, and I have friends in Silver City, people who respect me and the work I have done here. The Valdez brothers are not the only ones with influence." He took both her hands in his. "I know this is not how you would have wanted it, rushed and born out of fear. But Lucia, I meant what I said weeks ago. I love you. I want you to be my wife, want to build a life with you. If the timing is forced by circumstances, that does not make the feelings any less real." Lucia stared at him, her mind spinning. Marriage was sacred, was forever, and she had known Grant for only 2 months. But in those 2 months, she had seen his character, his kindness, his strength. She had fallen asleep thinking about him and woken looking forward to seeing him. She loved him, realized it fully in this moment of crisis, loved him with a ferocity that surprised her. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "Once you marry me, you tie yourself to my troubles. If the Valdez brothers come, they will not care about wedding vows." "Let them come," Grant said grimly. "I am not an easy man to kill, and I have dealt with worse than hired guns. But more than that, Lucia, I want this. I want you. Not just to protect you, though I will do that until my last breath, but because you make me happy in ways I did not know I could be. Marry me, please." Ruth was crying openly now, her hand pressed to her mouth. Miguel had the good grace to look away, giving them a moment of privacy in the midst of crisis. "Yes," Lucia said, and suddenly she was crying too, tears of fear and joy mixed together. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Grant Jameson, and I will be proud to be your wife." They rode into Silver City that afternoon, all four of them, Grant and Lucia and Ruth and Miguel, with Jose staying behind to watch the ranch. Grant wore his best shirt and vest, and Ruth had loaned Lucia a dress of pale blue that needed only minor alterations. They went straight to the church, where Father Gonzalez agreed to perform a quick ceremony despite the unusual circumstances. "I have known Grant since he was a boy," the old priest said, studying Lucia with kind eyes. "If he has chosen you, then you must be special indeed. Let us make this official in the eyes of God and the law." The ceremony was simple, just the words and the vows, but when Grant slipped a plain gold band onto Lucia's finger, his mother's ring, Ruth whispered, treasured and kept safe, she felt the weight of it like a shield against the world. They were married, husband and wife, and whatever came next, they would face it together. After the ceremony, they went to the Silver City courthouse and filed the marriage certificate, making sure it was properly recorded. Then Grant took Lucia to meet some of his friends, ranchers and businessmen who greeted him warmly and welcomed his new bride with genuine pleasure. By the time they left town as the sun was setting, a dozen people knew that Grant Jameson had married a woman named Lucia Castellano, and the news would spread like wildfire through the small community. Now, if the Valdez men come asking questions, they will find a married woman under the protection of a respected rancher, Grant explained as they rode home through the twilight. It will not stop them if they are truly determined, but it complicates things for them, makes it less easy to just make you disappear. That night, in the privacy of Grant's bedroom that was now their bedroom, Lucia stood nervously by the window, looking out at the stars. She heard Grant come in behind her, felt his hands gentle on her shoulders. "We do not have to do anything tonight," he said softly. "I know this is all happening fast, that you might need time." Lucia turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I am your wife. I want to be your wife in every way. I am just nervous because it has been so much change so quickly." "Then we go slow," Grant said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "We have the rest of our lives, Lucia. There is no rush." But as his kisses deepened, as his hands moved over her with reverence and growing passion, Lucia felt her nervousness dissolve into something warmer, something that made her skin flush and her heart race. They came together slowly, carefully, Grant checking with her at every step to make sure she was comfortable, that she wanted this. And she did want it, wanted him, wanted to seal their marriage vows with this ultimate intimacy. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Lucia felt a peace she had not known in months, maybe years. Grant held her close, his breathing evening out into sleep, and she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. The trouble came 3 days later. Lucia was in the kitchen making bread when she heard the sound of approaching horses, many of them. She looked out the window and felt her blood turn to ice. 6 men rode into the yard, all armed, all with the hard look of professional gunmen. And at the front, she recognized the angular face and cold eyes of Eduardo Valdez, the elder of the 2 brothers. Grant came out of the barn, rifle in hand but held casually, not pointed. Ruth appeared at Lucia's side, her face pale. "Stay inside," Ruth whispered. "Let Grant handle this." But Lucia could not hide, could not let Grant face this alone. She walked out onto the porch, her head high despite the fear coursing through her veins. Eduardo's eyes fixed on her immediately, and his smile was sharp as a knife. "So the little bird finally stops flying," he said, his accent thick. "You have led us on quite the chase, Lucia Castellano, or should I say Lucia Jameson? Yes, we heard about the hasty wedding, very clever." "State your business, Valdez," Grant said, his voice cold. You are on my land and you are not welcome." "My business is with your wife," Eduardo said, swinging down from his horse. His men followed suit, spreading out in a loose semicircle. "She witnessed a crime, and we need to make sure she understands the importance of keeping her mouth shut." "She is under my protection now," Grant said, moving to stand at the base of the porch steps, putting himself between Lucia and the gunmen. "And she does not go anywhere without me." "A piece of paper does not change what she saw," Eduardo said. "Don Rodrigo died because he could not mind his own business, and your wife seems to have the same problem." He looked up at Lucia, his eyes flat and dead. "Come with us quietly, and we will make it quick. Fight and things will be very unpleasant for everyone here." "You will leave my property now," Grant said, and there was iron in his voice, the absolute certainty of a man who would not be moved. "If you want Lucia, you will have to go through me, and I promise you that will not be as easy as you think." Miguel and Jose appeared from the barn, both armed with rifles. Ruth stepped out onto the porch with a shotgun that looked too big for her frame, but was held with steady confidence. The odds were still against them, 6-4, but Eduardo's expression shifted, calculation replacing certainty. "You would die for a woman you barely know?" Eduardo asked. "I would die for my wife," Grant corrected. "And before I went down, I would take at least 3 of you with me, starting with you, Valdez. So you have a choice. You can ride out of here now, alive and unharmed, or you can start something that will end very badly for everyone. What will it be?" The tension stretched taut as a wire for long seconds. Eduardo's hand drifted toward his gun, and Lucia saw Grant's finger move to the trigger of his rifle. She held her breath, certain that violence was about to erupt, that Grant would die defending her. Then a new voice cut through the silence. "That is quite enough." Everyone turned to see a man riding into the yard, a silver star pinned to his vest. He was older, maybe 50, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that suggested he had seen too much in his years wearing that badge. Behind him rode 2 deputies, both young and alert. "Sheriff Morrison," Eduardo said, and for the first time his confidence faltered. "This is not your concern. When armed men threaten one of my ranchers, it becomes my concern very quickly," Sheriff Morrison said, positioning his horse between Eduardo and the porch. "I came out here today to introduce myself to Grant's new wife and welcome her to the area. Imagine my surprise to find you here, Valdez, so far from your usual territory." "We have business with the woman," Eduardo said tightly. "What business would that be?" Morrison's voice was mild, but his eyes were sharp. "Last I checked, Lucia Jameson is a married woman with no outstanding warrants or charges. If you have some legal claim, you can take it up in court. Otherwise, you are trespassing on private property, and I suggest you leave before I arrest you for disturbing the peace." Eduardo looked between the sheriff and Grant, clearly calculating odds and not liking what he found. Finally, he nodded sharply to his men. "We will go, but this is not finished." "Actually, it is," Sheriff Morrison said. "I spoke with the federal marshal in Santa Fe last week. Seems there is a lot of interest in the Valdez family these days, questions about land deals and cattle that keep disappearing. If I were you, Eduardo, I would worry more about my own problems and less about one young woman." He smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "Safe travels back to Las Cruces." The gunmen mounted up and rode out, Eduardo casting one last venomous look at Lucia before spurring his horse into a gallop. Only when they were out of sight did Lucia let herself breathe again, her legs suddenly weak. Grant was beside her in an instant, holding her steady. "How did you know to come?" he asked the sheriff. Morrison dismounted, removing his hat. "Ruth sent word yesterday through a neighbor, said there might be trouble brewing. I did some checking, made some inquiries. The Valdez brothers have been building quite the reputation, and not in a good way. The federal marshals have been wanting a reason to look into their operations, and I was happy to provide one." He looked at Lucia kindly. "You are safe now, Mrs. Jameson. The marshals will handle the Valdez family, and if what I suspect is true, those boys will be too busy defending themselves against criminal charges to worry about you." "Thank you," Lucia said, her voice shaking. "You saved our lives." "Grant would have handled himself just fine," Morrison said. "But I am glad I could help avoid bloodshed. Paperwork is a nightmare when people start shooting." He accepted a cup of coffee from Ruth and spent the next hour getting the details of what Lucia had witnessed, writing everything down carefully. "This will go to the marshal's office. Your testimony about Don Rodrigo's murder could be the key to bringing the Valdez family down." "Will she have to go back to Las Cruces?" Grant asked, his arm tight around Lucia's waist. "Eventually, yes, to testify when the case goes to trial. But that is months away, maybe a year. And when she does go, she will have federal protection." Morrison finished his coffee and stood. "In the meantime, you folks just live your lives. You have earned some peace." After the sheriff left, Lucia found herself shaking with reaction, all the fear and adrenaline of the confrontation hitting her at once. Grant carried her inside and held her while she cried, great wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "You are safe now, we are safe." "He was going to kill you," Lucia gasped. "He would have shot you and it would have been my fault. But he did not. We are here, we are alive, and the Valdez brothers will not trouble us again." Grant tilted her face up, making her look at him. "You are my wife, Lucia. Protecting you is not a burden, it is a privilege. I would face down 100 Eduardo Valdezes if it meant keeping you safe." "I love you," she said, the words fierce and desperate. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good," Grant said, kissing her. "Be terrified. That means it is real." The winter passed quietly, the threat of the Valdez family fading into memory as news filtered back from Las Cruces. Eduardo and his brother had been arrested on federal charges, their empire of intimidation crumbling once people felt safe enough to speak against them. Don Rodrigo's murder was just one crime among many, but Lucia's testimony would be crucial, Sheriff Morrison assured her. In the meantime, she and Grant built their life together. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, learned to read weather and cattle, learned which horses had personalities and which were just practical transportation. She taught Ruth to make her mother's recipes, tamales and pozole and sweet buñuelos that made Grant close his eyes in pleasure when he ate them. At night, in the warmth of their bed, she and Grant discovered each other with growing confidence and joy. He was a generous lover, patient and attentive, and Lucia found that her body could feel pleasure as well as fear, could sing with sensation when he touched her just right. They talked about everything in those dark hours, their pasts and their hopes for the future, building intimacy from words and silence and the simple act of being together. By spring, Lucia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, the subtle changes in her body unmistakable, but she waited to be certain before telling Grant. One morning in late April, she met him at the door when he came in from the early chores and simply said, "We are going to have a baby." The expression on his face was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty she had endured, pure joy, wonder, and a tenderness that made her heart ache. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then set her down carefully as if she might break. "Are you sure? Really sure? Really sure?" The baby should come in late November or early December. Ruth burst into tears and hugged them both. The ranch hands grinned and congratulated them. That night, Grant held Lucia close and talked about building an addition to the house, about names, about what kind of father he wanted to be. "I want to be the kind of father my own was," he said quietly. "Fair, honest, always there when needed. I want our children to grow up knowing they are loved, knowing they have a home that will always welcome them." "They will know that," Lucia promised. "How could they not with a father like you?" In late June, word came that the Valdez trial would take place in August, and Lucia would need to travel to Santa Fe to testify. Grant immediately made arrangements to accompany her, refusing to let her face that ordeal alone. "The baby," Lucia protested. "The ranch needs you." "The ranch will survive for 2 weeks without me. You need me more." Grant was immovable on this point, and Lucia secretly was relieved. The thought of seeing Eduardo Valdez again, even in a courtroom, made her nauseated. They made the journey to Santa Fe in early August, traveling slowly to accommodate Lucia's pregnancy. The federal marshal met them at the courthouse, a tall man named Marshal Garrett who treated Lucia with grave courtesy. "Your testimony is critical, Mrs. Jameson. The Valdez brothers have terrorized southern New Mexico for years, but witnesses have always been too afraid to speak against them. You are brave to come forward." "I am not brave," Lucia said. "I am just tired of running." The trial lasted 3 days. Lucia testified on the second day, telling the court exactly what she had seen the night Don Rodrigo died. Eduardo Valdez stared at her from the defendant's table, his expression murderous, but with Grant sitting directly behind her and Marshal Garrett nearby, she felt protected enough to speak clearly and truthfully. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she had invented the story, that she had reason to lie. But other witnesses came forward too, emboldened by Lucia's courage, and the weight of evidence became overwhelming. On the third day, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts, including murder. Eduardo and his brother were sentenced to hang. As the marshals led them away, Eduardo looked directly at Lucia and mouthed words she could not quite make out but knew were threats. Grant's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. "It is over," he said. "He cannot hurt you anymore." They stayed in Santa Fe an extra day, wanting to be certain there would be no appeals or delays. Marshal Garrett assured them the sentences would be carried out within the month, and the Valdez organization was finished. Men who had worked for them were either arrested or had scattered, no longer protected by fear and money. On the journey home, Lucia felt as if a weight had lifted from her shoulders. The nightmares that still occasionally plagued her seemed less vivid, less immediate. She had faced her demons in that courtroom and emerged victorious, and now she could truly move forward with her life. The pregnancy progressed without complications, though Lucia grew large and uncomfortable as autumn arrived. Grant was endlessly patient, rubbing her aching feet and back, helping her with tasks that had become difficult. He talked to her belly at night, telling the baby stories about the ranch and the horses, making Lucia laugh with his earnest explanations of cattle management to a child who had not yet been born. Ruth was equally excited, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, preparing the new room Grant had added to the house. The ranch hands placed bets on whether the baby would be a boy or a girl, and the whole household buzzed with anticipation. The baby came on a cold December night, arriving faster than anyone expected. Lucia woke with pains around midnight, and by dawn, she was holding a squalling, red-faced infant with a full head of dark hair and lungs that suggested he would make his presence known. "A son," the midwife announced, placing the baby on Lucia's chest. Healthy and strong, just like his father, Grant looked at his son with an expression of awe and terror that made Lucia smile through her exhaustion. "He is so small. How can something so small be a whole person?" "Hold him," Lucia urged, and Grant carefully took the baby, cradling him with surprising gentleness for such a big man. The baby quieted immediately, his unfocused eyes seeming to study his father's face. "Hello, little one," Grant whispered. "I am your papa, and I am going to love you and protect you every day of your life. That is a promise." They named him Gabriel Tomas Jameson, Gabriel for Grant's father and Tomas for Lucia's. The baby was a good child, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches, and Lucia recovered quickly from the birth. Those first weeks were a blur of feedings and diaper changes, and exhausted wonder at the tiny person they had created. Winter gave way to spring, and Gabriel grew from a helpless infant into a baby who smiled and laughed and grabbed at everything within reach. Grant was a devoted father, carrying his son everywhere, showing him the horses and cattle, talking to him as if he understood every word. "You are going to spoil him," Lucia teased one afternoon, watching Grant walk Gabriel around the corral, pointing out different horses. "A father's job is to spoil his children," Grant retorted. "Besides, he needs to learn early. This will all be his someday, his and his siblings." "Siblings, plural," Lucia raised an eyebrow. "You are already planning more children," Grant grinned at her. "I said I wanted 3 or 4, remember? Gabriel is just the beginning." And he was right. 18 months after Gabriel's birth, Lucia gave birth to a daughter they named Rosalina, a tiny thing with her father's gray eyes and a surprisingly calm temperament. 2 years after that came another son, Marcus, who was all energy and mischief from the moment he could crawl. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Grant expanded the herd, bought more land, built a better barn. The cattle brought good prices at market, and they were able to save money to build security for their growing family. Miguel and Jose stayed on, eventually marrying local girls and starting families of their own in cabins Grant built on the property. Ruth married a schoolteacher from Silver City when Gabriel was 3, a quiet man named Thomas who adored her and treated Grant's children like his own nieces and nephews. They moved into a house in town, but Ruth visited often, unable to stay away from the ranch that had been her home for so long. Lucia sometimes thought about her old life in Las Cruces, the house and garden she had abandoned, but the memories no longer carried pain. That was the past, a different life lived by a different version of herself. Her present was here, in this house Grant had built, with children laughing in the yard and the smell of bread baking in the oven. One evening when Gabriel was 7, Rose 5, and Marcus 3, Lucia stood on the porch watching Grant teach Gabriel to throw a rope. The boy was determined but clumsy, and the rope kept tangling, but Grant was patient, demonstrating again and again. Rose was helping Lucia plant flowers, chattering about a bird she had seen that morning while Marcus napped on a blanket in the shade. "Mama, do you think the flowers will bloom before my birthday?" Rose asked, patting dirt around a transplanted violet. "I think so, darling. Another month and they should be beautiful. I want to pick some for Papa. He likes flowers." "He does," Lucia agreed, smiling at the thought of her big, tough rancher husband getting misty-eyed over a bouquet of wildflowers from his daughter. Grant looked up then, catching her eye across the yard, and smiled. It was the same smile he had given her years ago when she was half dead in his yard, full of warmth and promise and love. She smiled back, feeling the same surge of affection and gratitude that she felt every day when she looked at him. This life they had built together was everything she had dreamed of and more. She had left her homeland broken and terrified, had found sanctuary on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, and had discovered that sometimes the worst moments lead to the greatest blessings. That night, after the children were in bed, Grant and Lucia sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, content. "You ever regret it?" Grant asked quietly. "How we started, the rush of it all?" "Never," Lucia said firmly. "You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me a home, a family, a future. How could I regret that?" "Good," Grant said, kissing the top of her head. "Because I do not regret a single moment. Best decision I ever made, marrying you. Even when I burned the biscuits last week, even then. Although maybe we do not mention those to Ruth." Lucia laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. In the distance, a coyote called and the horses nickered softly in the corral. It was a peaceful sound, the sound of home and safety and belonging. As the years continued to pass, the Jameson family became a fixture in the Silver City area. Grant served on the town council, helping to make decisions about schools and roads and water rights. Lucia joined the Church Ladies' Society, made friends with other ranch wives, and became known for her skill with medicinal herbs and her willingness to help anyone in need. Gabriel grew tall and serious, with his father's love of the land and his mother's compassion. He worked the ranch alongside Grant, learning every aspect of cattle ranching, and by the time he was 15, he could do any job as well as his father. Rose was the family beauty, sweet-natured and artistic, spending hours sketching the landscape and the animals. Marcus was the wild one, always getting into scrapes and adventures, making his parents' hair turn prematurely gray with his antics. When Gabriel was 16, Lucia gave birth to their fourth child, a daughter they named Sophia. The pregnancy was harder than the previous ones. Lucia now in her late 30s and not as young as she had been with Gabriel, but the baby was healthy, and Lucia recovered well, if slowly. "I think 4 is enough," she told Grant one night as they watched baby Sophia sleep. "I am getting too old for this." 4 is perfect," Grant agreed, though his eyes were soft as he looked at his youngest daughter. "Our family is complete." And it did feel complete, the house always full of noise and activity, children and animals and the constant work of the ranch. Grant taught his sons everything he knew about ranching, but he also taught Rose, refusing to let her be left out just because she was a girl. Lucia taught all her children to read and write, insisted they study arithmetic and history, and made sure they knew both English and Spanish. The children grew up knowing the story of how their parents met, though Lucia edited out the more frightening details until they were older. They knew their mother had come from New Mexico territory fleeing danger, that their father had offered her sanctuary, and that love had grown from that beginning. It was a romantic story, and Rose in particular loved to hear it, always begging for more details. When Gabriel was 18, he started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a practical girl named Sarah who could ride and rope as well as any man. Grant and Lucia approved, seeing that Sarah made their son happy and would be an excellent partner for ranch life. The wedding was set for the following spring, and the whole community celebrated. Rose, at 16, announced her intention to go to a proper art school in Denver, wanting to pursue her painting seriously. Grant was reluctant, not wanting to let his daughter go so far away, but Lucia supported Rose's ambition. "Let her try," she urged Grant. "If it does not work out, she can always come home, but if we do not let her try, she will always wonder what might have been." So Rose went to Denver with Lucia's blessings and a substantial chunk of the ranch savings. And she thrived there, eventually becoming a respected portrait artist who divided her time between Denver and extended stays at the ranch. Marcus, true to form, announced at 17 that he wanted to join the cavalry, craving adventure beyond the ranch. Grant tried to talk him out of it, worried about the dangers, but Marcus was stubborn, a trait he came by honestly. In the end, Grant gave his blessing and Marcus rode off to Fort Bliss in Texas, promising to write regularly. Sophia, the baby, grew up adored by her older siblings and parents alike. She was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to know how things worked. Lucia saw herself in Sophia, that same determination and strength, and knew her youngest would do something remarkable with her life. The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges but also deep satisfaction. Grant's hair turned fully gray, though he was still strong and active, running the ranch with Gabriel's help. Lucia found silver threads in her own dark hair and lines around her eyes, but she wore them proudly, marks of a life well lived. They became grandparents when Gabriel and Sarah had their first child, a boy they named Grant Jr. Holding her grandson for the first time, Lucia felt the circle of life complete itself. She had come to this ranch fleeing death, and now she held new life in her arms, the continuation of the family she and Grant had built together. More grandchildren followed, from Gabriel and Sarah, and eventually from Marcus, who left the cavalry after 6 years and returned home to marry a girl from Silver City. Rose never married, content with her art and her independence, but she remained close to the family, visiting often and spoiling her nieces and nephews outrageously. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Grant took Lucia back to the bluff where they had once talked about children and the future. They were in their late 40s now, their children mostly grown, their ranch prosperous and secure. They sat on the same rock, looking out over the land that had become their kingdom. "You remember what you said to me here?" Grant asked, his arm around her waist. "I said I wanted to live without fear," Lucia replied, "and that children sounded wonderful if the world ever felt safe enough. And now I have lived 20 years without fear, raised 4 children in safety and love, and built a life I could never have imagined that night I stumbled into your yard." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You kept your promise, Grant. You made the world safe for me, for our children. You gave me sanctuary and so much more. You gave me a reason to build something beyond just land and cattle," Grant said. "You gave me a family, a purpose, a love that makes every day worth living. I am the one who should be grateful." "Then we are both grateful," Lucia said, tilting her face up for a kiss. "Both blessed beyond measure." As they sat there watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lucia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The terror and loss, the desperate flight through the desert, the moment Grant had lifted her from the dust and promised she was safe. Every step, every hardship had led to this moment, this life, this love. She had been forced to leave her homeland, had lost everything she knew, but in losing it all, she had found something infinitely more precious. Grant had made his land her sanctuary, but together they had created something greater, a home built on love and trust and shared dreams. The years continued their steady march. Grant and Lucia grew older together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had played. They told stories of the old days, of how they met, of building the ranch, of raising their family. When Grant turned 60, he officially turned over the running of the ranch to Gabriel, though he still rode out most days to check on things and offer advice. Lucia spent her time in the garden with her grandchildren and working with the church to help families in need. She never forgot what it was like to be desperate and alone, and she made sure no one in their community suffered that way if she could prevent it. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, a huge gathering that filled the ranch house to bursting. Ruth and Thomas came from Silver City with their own grown children. Miguel and Jose, both gray-haired now, attended with their families. Sheriff Morrison, long retired but still sharp as ever, raised a toast to the couple. 30 years ago, I rode out here expecting trouble and found true love instead, he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. Grant and Lucia Jameson are proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest moments. Here is to 30 more years. Everyone cheered and drank, and Grant pulled Lucia close, kissing her in front of everyone with no embarrassment or hesitation. Their grandchildren giggled and made faces, but Lucia saw the approval in her children's eyes, the knowledge that they had been raised by parents who truly loved each other. That night, alone again in their bedroom, Grant held Lucia close in the darkness. "I love you," he said, simple and true. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you lying in my yard, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Lucia replied, her hand over his heart, feeling its steady beat. "You are my sanctuary, my home, my everything." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, and if their bodies were older and slower than they had been 30 years ago, their hearts were still as young and full as they had been on their wedding day. The final chapter of their story came when they were both in their 70s, still living on the ranch, though Gabriel and Sarah ran everything now. Sophia had become a teacher in Silver City. Marcus was running his own ranch with his family, and Rose was a celebrated artist whose work hung in galleries across the West. The ranch land had been divided among the children, ensuring each had a stake in the legacy Grant and Lucia had built. One spring morning, Grant did not wake up. He died peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding Lucia's, his expression serene. Lucia woke to find him gone, and though grief crashed over her like a wave, there was also gratitude. He had not suffered, had not lingered in pain or confusion. He had simply slipped away, still at home, still beside the woman he loved. The funeral was huge, the entire community coming out to pay respects to a man who had been a pillar of the area for over 50 years. Lucia stood strong through it all, supported by her children and grandchildren, and when they lowered Grant into the ground beside his parents, she whispered a private goodbye. "Wait for me," she said softly. "I will join you soon enough, my love. Save a place for me." But Lucia lived another 5 years, her health remaining good despite her age. She spent those years with her family, teaching her grandchildren about herbs and gardening, telling them stories of their grandfather, making sure they knew the history of the ranch and the love that had built it. She died on a warm summer evening, sitting on the porch swing with Gabriel beside her. They had been talking about nothing important, just the weather and the cattle prices, when she suddenly grew quiet. Gabriel looked over and saw that her eyes were closed, a peaceful smile on her face, and she was gone. They buried her next to Grant, under the cottonwood tree they had planted together 40 years earlier. The entire family gathered, 3 generations strong, to say goodbye to the woman who had fled into the desert with nothing and built an empire of love. Rose, now a renowned artist in her 60s, painted a portrait from memory that hung in the ranch house for generations after. It showed Grant and Lucia as they had been in their prime, standing together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at something beyond the viewer's sight. The painting captured not just their faces but the essence of their love, the sanctuary they had created for each other. The ranch continued under Gabriel's management, then passed to his children, carrying the Jameson name into the 20th century. The story of Grant and Lucia became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The woman who had fled her homeland and the cowboy who had made his land her sanctuary, whose love had built something lasting and true. In the end, that was their legacy, not just the land or the cattle or the prosperous ranch, but the proof that love could triumph over fear, that sanctuary could become home, and that two people who found each other in the darkest moments could build a light bright enough to shine through generations. Their story was complete, every thread resolved, every promise kept. They had lived fully and loved deeply, had raised good children and built a good life, and when death finally claimed them both, they went knowing they had made the most of the chance the desert had given them so many years ago. The ranch still stands today, much changed but still bearing the Jameson name, still telling the story of a woman who needed safety and a man who provided it, and the love that grew from that simple beginning into something extraordinary. It is a story worth remembering, worth telling, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be, to the people who will become our everything, to the place that will become our home. Lucia Castellano came to Grant Jameson's ranch as a refugee, fleeing violence and death, and she left it decades later as Lucia Jameson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and the heart of a family that would carry her legacy forward for generations. She had been forced to leave her homeland, but in leaving, she had found something far better, something worth every moment of fear and hardship. She had found sanctuary, home, and love that transcended every trial. She had found Grant, and together they had built a life that was richer and fuller than anything either could have created alone. That was the true miracle of their story, not just survival but thriving, not just safety but joy, not just shelter but genuine, lasting love. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispers through the cottonwoods and the desert air cools after the heat of day, some say you can still feel their presence on that ranch, still sense the love that made it holy ground, still hear the echo of Grant's promise from that first day. You are safe here. And she was, for all the rest of her days.